I was elbow deep in a vendor portal, trying to reconcile 3 different invoices for the same pallet of pressure sensors, when my boss leaned over my cube like a seagull hunting fries. "No way we're paying for your little vacation," he smirked, flicking my travel request back onto my keyboard. "A $1,500 trip to sit across from our largest client, Soliton Dynamics, and keep a wobbly contract from tipping over." Apparently that was a beach day in his head. Vacation. That's what he called the only face-to-face we'd been offered in months. I smiled the way women in middle management are trained to smile. All teeth, no heat. And said, "Understood." Then I rerouted a shipment that would have stalled our Denver line, soothed a carrier, sweet-talked a broker, and drafted the escalation email he'd paste into his nightly leadership update. He'd CC the board and I'd get a thumbs-up emoji. That was the exchange rate here. Soliton wasn't a flashy logo. They didn't host yacht parties or post drone shots of their HQ, but their modules powered nearly half of our top-selling product line. Their account was the quiet backbone that paid for the espresso machine marketing forgot to budget. And lately, they were nervous. 3 late deliveries, 1 technical support ticket that sat in purgatory for 12 days, 1 just checking in from their COO that read in corporate like, "Are you asleep at the wheel?" I'd been the voice on every late-night call. I knew the names of their line managers, their kids, their allergy schedules. Soliton asked for a short in-person reset. 2 days, 1 factory walk, 1 negotiation. I built a case. $1,500 for an economy seat, a mid-range hotel, and the kind of eye contact you can't attach to an email. I attached risk analysis, forecasts, then the sentence that should have sealed it. "This is the last low-cost intervention before they shop alternatives." My boss, Mason, laughed. "They're not going anywhere," he said, and turned back to a slide titled Relationship Excellence. That night, I sat at my kitchen table in the same slacks I'd worn since 6 a.m., listening to my neighbor's dog yodel at nothing. My laptop glowed with flight options and a blinking cursor in an unsent email. I reread Mason's denial. I reread Soliton's "We value continuity." I thought about my team. Good people who thought my ability to fix things was magic, not muscle. The next morning, I asked Mason if he'd at least join the video call Soliton had offered as a consolation. He waved a hand like he was dusting crumbs. "Ellen, send them a deck. Charts." They love charts. Soliton didn't love charts. They loved people who showed up when it mattered. That afternoon, I called Priya, our account lead on paper and my ally in reality. "If we don't show, they'll set a date with Starkline," she said softly. I stared at the request denial on my screen. The word vacation pulsed like a bruise. "Then we show," I said. "Approved?" she asked. "Not exactly." So I booked the trip myself. Coach seat, middle row, hotel that promised continental breakfast, and delivered beige bread. I filed PTO for 2 days and attached a tidy industry conference itinerary I built in Canva at midnight. I ordered 100 cheap business cards that said, "Ellen Ward, Vendor Relations Consultant." Not a lie. Just unshackled accuracy. Before I clicked purchase, I opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Photos from a plant audit. The one where Soliton's maintenance chief lost his father mid-shift and I covered his line, hairnet and all, so he could drive to the hospital. A thank you note from their COO. Handwritten, "You were there when there was nothing in it for you." I'd kept it, not because I'm sentimental, but because memory is flimsy and proof matters. The day before I flew out, I walked into Mason's office with a 1-pager. No color, no swoops. "Soliton is at risk," I said. "If they leave, we miss our quarterly and we don't get them back." "Ellen," he sighed. "Fear-based selling is tacky." "It's math," I said. He smiled at his reflection in the shelf glass and called it leadership. Walking back to my desk, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not anger, calibration. The click into place when you realize the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. And you can either keep feeding it your weekends, or you can rewrite where your effort lands. That night, I packed a carry-on. 2 blazers, flats that didn't punish ankles, the handwritten note, and a printed copy of our service-level history with every red circle I couldn't ignore. I slept badly. Not because I was scared, because I was done being polite about the cost of silence. Soliton's lobby smelled like solvent and apples. Their COO, Marin, met me with a tight smile that softened when she saw my face instead of a Zoom tile. "You came," she said. "Of course," I answered. We walked the line. We listened more than we talked. We didn't sell anything. We fixed small things and scheduled time for big things. Over coffee in a windowless room, Marin slid a folder toward me. Inside, a letter addressed to our CEO. Not a threat, a mirror. It detailed exactly what they needed to stay and what they'd do if we didn't show them we could hear. "Do you want me to courier this?" I asked. "No," she said. "I want you to hand it to the person who actually shows up." On the flight home, I watched a cloud seem the color of a bruise and thought about the sentence I would underline if anyone asked what this story is about. People don't leave companies. They leave the feeling of not mattering. Back at my desk 2 days later, no one asked where I'd been. Mason bragged about a positive touch point he'd had with Soliton. He winked at me like we'd done it together. A week later, the CEO unfolded a letter in front of the board. His expression froze. He passed it to legal. The lawyer looked up and asked one question. "Where is she?" The morning after Soliton handed me that folder, I couldn't stop replaying the conversation. Marin hadn't raised her voice, hadn't threatened. She'd simply looked at me across a chipped conference table, slid the letter forward, and said, "We need to know someone is listening." That stuck, not the details of the letter, though those were sharp enough to slice through our entire quarterly forecast. But the tone. Calm, inevitable, like a tide coming in whether you had a bucket or not. By the time I landed back in Ohio, I'd read the letter 5 times. It was precise. Delivery failures logged by date and time. Service lapses tied to production costs. A closing paragraph that spelled out their next steps if we didn't respond. Starkline and Auron, 2 competitors we couldn't afford to lose ground to. And the signature at the bottom, not Marin, not the COO, but Soliton's CEO. I tucked the folder into the bottom of my carry-on under a half-empty bag of pretzels and went back to work like nothing had happened. No one noticed I'd been gone. My calendar showed 2 days of PTO marked personal, and that was enough for Mason. He was already pacing the floor with his phone pressed to his ear, rehearsing his Q3 resilience pitch for the board. I slid into my desk, answered 3 vendor emails, and opened the Soliton folder again just to make sure I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with the letter spread out beside a mug of tea I never drank. My dog snored under the chair. I tried to picture how this would play out if I handed it to Mason. He'd skim the first paragraph, maybe the second, and then spin it into a bullet point for his PowerPoint deck. Client communication ongoing. He'd write, minor stability concerns. He wouldn't see it for what it was, a warning shot. The next morning, I slipped the letter into a plain manila envelope, wrote confidential across the front, and slid it into my tote. I told myself I'd wait for the right moment. Board meetings always carried a haze of noise, charts, jargon, people talking just to prove they belonged in the room. Maybe, I thought, if the letter arrived when the noise was loudest, the silence afterward would be deafening. But even before the board meeting, the tension around Soliton was growing. Priya stopped by my desk one afternoon, eyes darting. "Did you hear? Soliton's COO canceled next month's webinar." No explanation. I nodded like it was news, though the weight of the letter pressed against my tote under the desk. "Maybe they're busy." "Or maybe," she whispered, "they're looking somewhere else." Mason strutted through the office later that day, announcing, "Don't worry about Soliton. They're steady. I've got it under control." His grin was wide, but his voice cracked on steady. It was surreal, knowing what I knew, holding in my bag the evidence that contradicted every word he said. For years, I'd been the one patching holes before anyone noticed the leaks. Now, for the first time, I wasn't patching. I was waiting. 2 days before the quarterly board meeting, Mason called a prep huddle. 10 of us crammed into a glass-walled room, our reflections hovering behind us like tired ghosts. He clicked through slides, growth charts in gradient blue, bullet points in Comic Sans. This, he said, is how we prove stability, relationships, trust, vision. I sat there, silent, thinking of Soliton's CEO writing, "If we don't see change, we will transition all orders to Starkline by the first quarter." When the meeting ended, Mason patted me on the shoulder. "Nice work, Ellen." Thanks for the background numbers background. That was what he called the only thing holding the company's supply line together. On the morning of the board meeting, I dressed carefully. Navy blazer, flats, hair pulled back. Professional, unremarkable. I wanted to blend in until the moment I didn't. The boardroom smelled of coffee and new carpet. Suits filed in with their phones buzzing, assistants whispering in the doorway. Mason stood at the head of the table, chest puffed, laser pointer in hand. "Legacy client relationships are stronger than ever," he began, clicking to a slide that showed a line graph pointing skyward. "Soliton remains fully aligned. We anticipate another 2 years of steady growth." My throat tightened. My tote sat at my feet. The envelope inside. Halfway through the presentation, a courier knocked on the glass door. Tan envelope in hand. Thick, stamped, unmistakably official. The receptionist whispered to the CEO, who took the envelope, puzzled. He opened it, unfolded the letter, and went pale. Silence spread like ink in water. He read once, then again. Finally, he slid it across the table to the lawyer. The lawyer adjusted his glasses, eyes scanning fast, then slow. His jaw clenched. He looked up, scanning faces, and asked a question that made my pulse thunder. "Where is she?" I didn't move. Not yet. My tote was still closed, the second copy of the letter still hidden inside. But in that moment, the balance shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. And Mason? He had no idea his vacation had just walked into the boardroom. The lawyer's question hung in the air like a fire alarm that hadn't decided whether to scream. "Where is she?" Mason blinked, followed the lawyer's gaze down the table, and found me. His expression twitched. Surprise first, then calculation. "Ellen?" he said, as if he'd stumbled onto a stranger in his kitchen. The CEO motioned to the empty chair beside him. "Miss Ward, would you join us for a moment?" I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked forward. My tote felt heavier than it was. I sat, set the bag by my feet, and folded my hands. The letter lay between the CEO and the lawyer like a live wire. "Ms. Ward," the lawyer said, voice even. "Did you attend a meeting with Soliton Dynamics last week?" "Yes." "On company business?" Mason jumped in. Too fast. "She was on PTO," he added with a thin smile as if that settled it. The lawyer didn't look at him. "Did you meet with their COO?" "Yes," I said. "At their request." "What was discussed?" "Performance, missed deliveries. Their timeline if we didn't correct course." The CEO tapped the letter. "This timeline?" I glanced at the header. Soliton letterhead. Dated. Signed. "Yes." Mason let out a soft laugh that didn't land anywhere. "Let's not be dramatic. We've had hiccups, sure, but our relationship with Soliton is—" "Please," the CEO said, not looking at him. "Not now." He turned to me again. "Why weren't we informed of this meeting?" "I requested approval for a short trip," I said. $1,500, flights, hotel. It was denied. The room shifted, small movements, the kind people make when they're trying not to be seen reacting. Mason sat straighter. "We denied a vacation request," he said. "This isn't the forum for—" "It wasn't a vacation," I said. Not loud, just clear. It was the least expensive way to keep our largest client from moving their orders. The lawyer slid a copy of the letter to me. Is this the one you saw? It is. I have a duplicate. I reached into my tote, placed my copy next to his. Same folds, same signature, same closing paragraph. We will initiate transition to Starkline in the first quarter unless we see immediate, measurable change. The CEO leaned back, hands together, face pale in a way that made him look older. Why did they send this to me directly? He asked the table, though no one answered. Then to me, why did they trust you with it? I thought of the plant audit years ago, of covering a line so someone could leave to say goodbye to his father, of calling at midnight instead of emailing in the morning. Because I show up, I said. We all do in operations, but faces matter when things wobble. Priya, seated along the wall, shifted a notebook in her lap, saying nothing. She knew the ledger as well as I did, where people had quietly paid with weekends to keep lines running. The lawyer nodded toward the graphs frozen on the wall. Your slide says Soliton is fully aligned for 2 more years, he said to Mason. On what basis? Mason opened his hands. On the basis of long history and my conversations with their team. With whom? The lawyer asked. Emails. Calls. Their procurement. His certainty frayed. Look, this letter is posturing. They always posture before Q4. The CEO's jaw tightened. Then why does it include dates and chargebacks we didn't contest? Why does it list response times from our help desk? Why does it reference a video call you didn't attend? Mason didn't have an answer. He pivoted. If Ellen felt this was urgent, she could have escalated to me instead of freelancing. I kept my eyes on the CEO. I did escalate. Twice. I also handed you a 1-pager. The trip was cheaper than the penalty for 1 missed truck. Silence, then the soft tap of the CEO's pen on the table. How much would it cost us if Soliton shifts volume to Starkline? Conservatively? I said. 7 figures this quarter. More next, once secondary suppliers adjust lead times. We'll spend double to win it back if we can. Can we? He asked. I exhaled. If we act now, yes. Their letter isn't a door closing. It's a door propped open with a brick and a note. We're tired of talking to a wall. They want a person accountable. They want a plan with dates, names, and penalties on our side, not just theirs. The lawyer angled his head. And you believe you can recover this? I believe we can, if we stop pretending charts fix relationships. I paused. They asked to meet the person who actually shows up. I did. They gave me this to make sure it reached the person who could make decisions. The CEO looked at Mason. Why did you deny the trip? He gave a tired smile. Optics, budgets. We have to be disciplined. And frankly, sending an operations manager across the country for handholding? It was a domestic flight, I said quietly. 2 days. The cost of one team building happy hour. A director near the end of the table cleared his throat. Enough. He turned to the CEO. What do we need to do right now? The CEO stared at the letter, then at me. Draft an immediate response, he said. From me. Not a form email. A call today. A plan by morning. He shifted to the lawyer. Prepare a temporary authority memo that places Ms. Ward as point for Soliton execution for the next 30 days. Back to me. You'll have what you need. Travel, approvals, resources. No more PTO games. Mason's chair creaked. You can't just cut me out of my own account. It's not your account, the CEO said, voice flat. It's the company's. And right now the company needs someone Soliton will answer. He turned to me again. Can you be at Soliton tomorrow? Yes. Take Priya, he added. Whatever you ask for, she gets. Priya lifted her gaze, surprise flashing into something like relief. We'll make a list, she said. The CEO closed the letter, squared it with the edge of the table. We'll reconvene in 72 hours, he said. Bring back a path to calm. I stood, My hands weren't shaking. I noticed that. Mason avoided my eyes. As I walked back to my seat, he muttered, low enough to pretend it wasn't for me. "Enjoy your vacation." I slipped the duplicate letter into my tote. "It won't be one," I said. On my way out, the lawyer caught my arm. "Thank you," he said simply. No flourish, just the thing itself. It landed deeper than praise. In the elevator, Priya pressed the button for the lobby and stared at our reflections in the chrome. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm tired," I said, "but I'm done being invisible." We rode down in quiet. Somewhere above us, slides were still frozen on relationship excellence. Below, a client was waiting for someone to act like the word meant something. The following morning, my alarm went off at 5. I'd barely slept, my mind running through scenarios. What questions Soliton would ask, what proof they'd demand, what promises I could make without overstepping. My suitcase sat by the door, a plain black carry-on packed with 2 blazers, flats, and the duplicate folder I wasn't letting out of sight. When I reached the office, Priya was already there. She had 2 coffees balanced in one hand, her laptop bag in the other. "You ready?" she asked, handing me the stronger one. "As ready as I'll ever be." We drove to the airport in silence, each of us scrolling through emails, flagging the newest complaints in red. By the time the plane lifted off, my inbox had 4 more. 1 order late, 1 invoice error, 2 escalations, all Soliton. By noon, we were in a rented sedan, the kind with the smell of disinfectant baked into the upholstery. Soliton's campus was spread over 3 squat buildings with mirrored glass, surrounded by a parking lot full of pickup trucks and a few weary sedans. No glossy headquarters, no fountain out front, just quiet efficiency. Marin met us in the lobby. She shook Priya's hand, then mine. Her grip was firm, her eyes sharper than I remembered. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wasn't sure your company would take us seriously." "They should have," I answered. "We do." She led us through the plant. The air smelled faintly of ozone and machine oil. We walked past workers in navy coveralls, some nodding as we passed, others too focused on their consoles. Every few minutes, Marin stopped to point out an issue. A shipment delayed by customs, a calibration sensor overdue, a replacement part they'd been waiting on for 6 weeks. I scribbled everything down. Priya typed as fast as her fingers allowed. At one point, Marin stopped in front of a pallet half-wrapped in plastic. "This order was due to ship out Tuesday. It's Thursday." I checked the tag. The carrier had signed in, but no pickup. "Driver shortage," I said. "I'll call dispatch myself." "See?" she said quietly. "This is why we asked you to come." After the tour, we sat in a windowless conference room with a humming HVAC unit and a coffee pot that had seen better years. Marin opened a binder, thick with tabs. "Here's our reality," she said. "We like your company. We've worked together a long time, but every delay costs us credibility. We can't afford to explain to our clients why we're stuck waiting on parts you promised." I nodded. "Understood." She flipped to a page marked in red. "This is the last quarter we'll tolerate without guarantees." We're not bluffing. Starkline is courting us aggressively. Oren has already run a pilot order. Both are hungry and both are offering terms. My chest tightened. "What would it take to keep you?" Marin leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Commitment. Not just emails. Not just promises. A contract with penalties that hurt if you fail. A person on our account who answers, no matter the hour. And the sense that when we speak, someone listens." I glanced at Priya, then back at Marin. "We can draft a contract with service-level guarantees. We'll assign a dedicated escalation path. Me and Priya, directly. If there's a miss, you'll know who's responsible." She studied me for a long moment. "Do you actually have the authority to make that promise?" I hesitated, then told the truth. "Not officially. But I have the attention of our CEO. You gave me that with your letter. He's listening now." Something softened in her expression, just a little. Good, because we won't wait long. That night, Priya and I sat in the hotel bar, papers spread out between empty glasses of water. She rubbed her temples. If we don't get leadership to sign this, it's over. You know that, right? I know. She gave a dry laugh. Funny how a $1,500 trip is the line between stability and collapse. It's never about the money, I said. It's about whether they think you're worth showing up for. The next morning, we met Soliton again and walked through a draft framework. They asked questions, pushed back on penalties, circled deadlines in thick red ink. By the end, we had the outline of an agreement. Not signed, not binding, but solid enough to prove intent. Maren closed her binder. We'll wait to see if your company stands behind you. If they do, we'll stay. If they don't... She didn't need to finish the sentence. On the flight home, Priya leaned against the window, eyes closed. I sat rigid, folder in my lap, mind racing through what came next. The CEO had given me temporary authority, but Mason wasn't finished. I could feel it. He'd find a way to spin this, to claim the trip was reckless, unnecessary. He'd stand in front of the board and say relationship excellence until someone believed him. I stared out the window at the patchwork fields below, the clouds casting long shadows. For the first time in years, I wasn't just a fixer patching holes. I was the hinge. The one decision that would decide whether we kept our biggest client or watched them walk. And I knew exactly how Mason would react when he realized it wasn't his hands on the hinge anymore. The boardroom was colder than usual, or maybe it was me. I sat at the long mahogany table with my folder resting on my lap, while Mason prowled at the front, laser pointer flashing across another slide full of upward arrows and empty words. Legacy partnerships are rock solid, he boomed. Soliton is locked in. 2 more years, minimum. I gripped the folder tighter. 2 more years? He hadn't even read the draft agreement Priya and I had hammered out in that windowless room. He was bluffing with nothing but confidence and recycled bullet points. Then the courier walked in. Tan envelope in hand. Confidential, addressed to the CEO. The room hushed as he handed it over. The CEO unfolded the letter. His jaw tightened as he read. The lawyer leaned over, scanning the page. A minute later, his voice cut through the silence. Where is she? Every head turned. I set the folder on the table and stood. My chair scraped back, echoing in the stunned quiet. I'm here. Mason blinked like he'd been slapped. Ellen? What are you doing? The CEO slid the letter toward me. Do you have something to add? I opened my folder. Inside were copies of the draft framework Priya and I had prepared with Soliton. I laid them out, page by page, in front of the CEO. 2 weeks ago, Soliton warned us. They're done with excuses. They wanted someone present, someone accountable. Mason denied the trip. Mason's face flushed. Because it was unnecessary. It wasn't unnecessary. I cut in, voice steady. It was survival. I went anyway, on my own time, on my own dime. Priya came too. We met with Maren and her team. This, I tapped the draft agreement, is the only reason they haven't already signed with Starkline. The lawyer picked up the papers, reading quickly. His brow furrowed, then eased. This matches the letter, he said quietly. Intent to continue, contingent on signed guarantees. The CEO's gaze sharpened. And you're telling me this trip was denied by Mason? Mason sputtered. I thought it was a vacation. $1,500 wasted. $1,500, I repeated, to secure a client worth 30% of our revenue. That's the price you thought was too high. The silence was heavy, broken only by the faint buzz of the overhead lights. One of the board members cleared his throat. If she hadn't gone, they'd be gone already, I said. Orders shifted. Contracts signed with competitors. We'd be discussing losses today, not possibilities. The CEO leaned back, eyes never leaving me. You risked this on your own? I swallowed hard. I didn't see another choice. They needed someone to listen. I chose to listen. Mason tried to laugh, but it came out brittle. She overstepped. She doesn't have authority. The lawyer cut him off. Authority or not, she has results. Saladin's letter makes that clear. The CEO closed the folder slowly, like he was sealing something permanent. Then he turned to Mason. You assured me Saladin was secure. You dismissed a critical request. You nearly cost us our largest client. Mason's mouth opened, then closed. His confidence, that endless performance, crumbled under the weight of the silence. The CEO shifted his gaze back to me. Ellen, you saved this partnership. At your own expense, I nodded once. My throat was tight, but I held his gaze. I did what needed to be done. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the CEO tapped the folder. You'll take point on finalizing this agreement. Effective immediately, Mason tried again, desperation leaking into his tone. You can't be serious. She doesn't... Enough. The CEO snapped. I want results, not excuses. The meeting moved on, but for me it had already ended. My hands shook slightly as I gathered my papers, sliding them back into the folder. I wasn't smiling. Not yet. But something in me had shifted. For years I'd been invisible, the quiet fixer in the corner. Now, my name was spoken in the room where decisions lived. Later that night, I sat in my kitchen, the same table where I'd stared at that first letter in silence. My dog dozed at my feet. I poured a glass of water, looked at my reflection in the dark window, and let the reality settle in. It hadn't been about a trip. Not really. It was about what it meant to be valued, about how easily people like Mason confuse silence with weakness or thrift with wisdom. $1,500. That was the hill he chose to stand on. And in the end, it cost him everything.